Welcome to Case Vault, where every case has a crack, a contradiction, a missed clue, a detail that should not be there. Today we're looking at a man who painted masterpieces that never existed and sold them to the experts. And the one thing inside the paint that the people closest to it never noticed. Cologne, Germany, 2006. A painting dated 1914 goes up for auction. The room believes it. Dealers, experts, serious money. The hammer falls at about 2.88 million euros. It's a record price for that artist, and it's a complete fake. The man who made it didn't copy famous works. He invented new ones in the style of dead masters and sold them as lost treasures. Museums believed him. Auction houses believed him. The people who wrote the books believed him. The paint did not. The canvas said 1914. The chemistry said years later. His name is Wolfgang Beltracchi, one of the most successful art forgers in modern history, and almost nobody outside the art world knew his name. He could paint, really paint. As a young man, he could study a master's work and reach inside the style until he could move a brush the very same way. Most forgers copy a painting that already hangs somewhere. That's the trap. Copy a known work, and now there are two of them, and sooner or later people start asking which one is real. Beltracchi did something smarter. He read deeply on the early modern painters, the ones working in the first decades of the 20th century. Then he looked for the gaps. A work mentioned in an old letter but never found. A painting listed in a record but never photographed. A picture said to have burned in the war and vanished. Then he painted that lost work himself. Brand new, but built to fit the hole in history exactly. The right artist, the right year, the right idea. He didn't do it with just one painter either. He worked in the styles of several early modern names: Max Ernst, André Derain, Max Pechstein, and more. That was the advantage. A rediscovered lost masterpiece creates excitement. A second copy of a famous one creates suspicion. He sold the first kind. But a convincing painting is more than a convincing image. The object itself has to be old. The canvas, the frame, the dust and cracks of a century. So Beltracchi went hunting for genuinely old canvases. He'd buy cheap, worthless paintings at flea markets, not for the picture, but for the age of the canvas and the stretcher underneath. He'd strip the old image away and keep the period canvas and the old wooden frame. Then he'd paint his forgery onto a surface already a century old. He learned to age the surface too, to coax the fine web of cracks across the paint that only time is supposed to create. And here is the detail that matters most in this whole case. He mixed his own paint. He didn't trust modern tubes from a shop. Modern paint can carry modern ingredients, and a lab can date a painting by the chemistry of its pigments alone. So he ground his colors by hand, using only pigments that would have existed in the year he was pretending to paint. Period correct, right down to the chemistry. Remember that. The thing that protected him for decades was control over the pigments. The less he trusted factory paint, the less modern chemistry had to betray. Hold on to it. Now even a flawless fake has one weakness left. Where has it been all this time? If a lost masterpiece suddenly appears, the first question is always the history. Who owned it? Why has nobody seen it for 50 years? In the art world, that history has a name: provenance. So Beltracchi and his wife Helene invented one. They built a story around a private collection that never existed. The story went like this. Helene's grandfather had quietly bought a cache of modern paintings before the war. It passed down through the family, packed away, unseen for generations. It explained everything. Why the paintings were unknown, why they had no paper trail, why they were all surfacing now from a single family. And then they did something that crossed from clever into cold. They faked the proof itself. Helene posed for photographs dressed as her own grandmother, sitting among the paintings, as if in a family sitting room decades earlier. They shot the pictures on genuine pre-war photographic paper. slightly blurred, slightly faded, so the prints looked exactly like real old family snapshots. An old photo of a painting hanging on a wall years ago is powerful proof. It quietly says, "This work is real, and it has been here the whole time." We're about to get to the sale that broke it open, and the one tube of paint that ended all of it. If you like a case where the smallest detail is the one that matters, subscribe now. It tells YouTube this kind of story has an audience. With the paintings and the history in place, the fakes walked straight into the top of the art world. Experts examined them and approved them. Galleries sold them. They ended up in private collections and public exhibitions across several countries. The people who study these artists for a living looked at a Beltracchi and saw the real thing. They didn't just accept the work, they admired it. That is how good he was. For years, that was the whole game. Paint a lost work. Wrap it in a family story. Let the experts hand it their blessing, then sell. Which brings us all the way back to the Red Horses. The painting was presented as a lost work from 1914 by the German expressionist Heinrich Campendonck. A wild, colorful scene of red horses against a broken landscape. In 2006, it sold through a respected auction house in Cologne for about 2.88 million euros, the highest price anyone had ever paid for that artist. The buyer was a company acting as an investor, and the buyer wanted one ordinary, reasonable thing: a certificate. A certificate of authenticity, a formal document confirming the painting is exactly what it claims to be. It's a normal request when you've just spent millions on a single canvas. But this one quiet request set something in motion. Think of it as a receipt for history. A document saying experts have checked this work and stand behind every claim about it. The painting was being studied for the official catalog of the artist's work, and along the way, the buyer's side had it examined far more closely. Not by eye this time, by chemistry. A forensic analysis of the actual paint sitting on the canvas. This is where decades of perfect fakes meet a microscope and a beam of light. A painter can fool another painter. It is much harder to fool an instrument that reads the molecular fingerprint of the paint. Scientists can identify the pigments in a painting. Each color is a specific compound, and each compound has its own chemical signature. They fire a beam of light at the paint and read what comes back. Each pigment leaves a signature. The lab can identify the material. And every pigment has a history, a date when it first appeared in artists' paint. That history is the trap a forger can't talk his way out of. In 2008, the analysis came back, and it found something that should not have been there at all. In the white paint, there was titanium white, a bright, modern white pigment built around a compound called titanium dioxide. Here is why that one detail ends everything. Titanium white was not yet in use in artists' paint in 1914. It only reached painters' tubes around 1920 to 1921, years after this picture was supposedly finished and signed. So a painting dated 1914 contained a white that no painter on earth could have squeezed from a tube in 1914. It's like finding a smartphone in a photograph from the 1940s. The object dates itself. It simply cannot belong to the year on the label. And now sit with the cruel part of this. The forger who ground his pigments by hand on purpose to avoid exactly this kind of mistake. On this one painting he had slipped. He'd run low on his own white. So he reached for a ready-made tube from a shop instead of grinding his own. The tube was labeled as zinc white, an old pigment that would have been perfectly fine, but the paint inside was secretly contaminated with titanium. The label never mentioned it. He couldn't see it. And because he hadn't mixed this batch himself, he had no idea what was really in that white. One tube, one time. The single time he trusted a factory instead of his own two hands. He has since called it his fatal error. The chemistry he couldn't see is the exact thing that gave him up. Here's the part that should stop you cold. He did test his pigments. He was careful. This one batch of white still slipped past his own checks. Everything else about that painting was right. The canvas was old. The brushwork was perfect. The story checked out, and none of it mattered. One pigment in a place it could not be outweighed a flawless forgery and a perfect lie. That's the quiet power of a forensic test. It doesn't argue, it can't be charmed, it only reads what is actually there. And that one out-of-place pigment didn't just sink one painting. Once the red horses were proven fake, investigators pulled hard on the thread. The invented collection, the faked photographs, the other paintings traced to the same source. The whole story that had quietly passed each painting from one hand to the next started to come apart piece by piece. And think about who he had fooled, not casual buyers. The leading experts on these very artists had signed off on his inventions. A career built on being unseen could not survive one piece of physical evidence that any lab in the world could test and repeat. On the 27th of August, 2010, Wolfgang Beltracchi was arrested in Freiburg, in southern Germany. Helene was arrested too. The collection that had explained everything was finally being read as what it always was: a story. At the trial in Cologne in 2011, Beltracchi admitted forging 14 paintings. 14 admitted fakes, each one sold as the lost work of a famous name, and those are only the ones proven in court. Prosecutors estimated the operation had brought in around 16 million euros, an estimate, not a full and final accounting. The only sale firmly nailed down is the one we started with, the red horses at about 2.88 million euros. Beltracchi was sentenced to 6 years in prison. Helene received 4. The fallout reached the auction house too. A court later held it liable over the red horses, and a settlement returned money to the buyer. He served his time under a relatively open arrangement and was released around 2015. And here is where the story turns strange. Because prison didn't end his career. It launched a new one. If this is the kind of case you like where one detail no one could see undoes everything, then subscribe. You'll want to be here for the next one. Today, Wolfgang Beltracchi paints openly and sells his work under his own name. The skill that once fooled the experts is now the selling point. People buy a real Beltracchi precisely because of what he used to be. He's been the subject of a documentary and a primetime television profile. One program called The Couple, the Bonnie and Clyde of the art world. He exhibits across Europe. He's tried his hand at new digital art. The notoriety that should have ended him became the brand. There's a strange honesty to it. For decades he hid his hand inside other men's names. Now the hand is the whole point. A man who went to prison for selling lies now makes a legal fortune from the simple truth of who he is. So step back and look at the whole thing for a moment. He could read a dead artist's mind well enough to paint the work they never made. He could fake the photos, the family, the history, the wear of 100 years. Every part under his control, he got right. The canvas, the frame, the brushwork, the pigments he mixed with his own hands. What undid him was the one part he didn't control, a white he bought instead of made, carrying an element he never knew was hiding inside it. For decades, experts could hold his work and miss the lie. A beam of light, looking at a single white, could. He could fake the painting. He could fake the history. He just couldn't fake the chemistry. And in the end, the white paint knew the difference. A forger who fooled the experts for decades got caught by a color he couldn't see inside. That's the case. If you see things other people miss, hit subscribe. Case Vault drops a new one twice a week, and the next crack is sharper than this one.